The stellar wind moved smoothly through the black ocean of space. Its silver hull reflected the light of distant stars, making it look like a shining arrow flying between worlds. Inside the cabin, passengers sat in comfortable seats, talking softly or watching small entertainment screens. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh fabric. The journey from Earth to the colony planet Asterion 4 would take 9 hours, and most travelers had settled into their routines. In seat 14A, a man named Elias Carter sat quietly. He wore a plain navy shirt and dark trousers. His short hair was neatly kept, and his expression was calm. Elias was not a man who liked attention. He preferred quiet spaces where his mind could work without distraction. On the fold-out tray in front of him lay an old-fashioned notebook made of thick paper. A smooth black pen rested in his hand, moving steadily over the page he was sketching. At first glance, his drawings looked like lines and curves without meaning, but to an experienced eye, they were more than that. The shapes formed the skeleton of a ship design, complete with engine placements, aerodynamic panels, and tiny symbols marking key components. Elias worked with precision, as if every stroke had been planned before the pen even touched the page. Each time he paused, his eyes narrowed in thought. Then he continued with steady movements. The other passengers barely noticed him. A boy across the aisle was absorbed in a hologame. A businesswoman beside him typed quickly on a slim data pad. The hum of the stellar wind's engines blended with the soft chatter in the cabin, creating a steady rhythm. For Elias, it was the perfect background for thinking. The sound of space travel was like a low heartbeat to him, something that kept his mind focused. Elias was not an ordinary passenger. He was one of the leading spacecraft designers for Orion Dynamics, the company responsible for building some of the most advanced starships in the human fleet. His work was known across multiple worlds. Though his name was not often spoken in public, he preferred it that way. For him, the reward was in the work itself, not the recognition. Today, his sketches were for something special, a new propulsion system he had been imagining for weeks. If his idea worked, it could make space travel faster and safer than ever before. A few rows away, a young flight attendant named Marina Holt was making her way down the aisle. She checked passengers' needs, offered drinks, and made sure everything was in order. Marina was efficient at her job. She was also curious by nature. As she approached seat 14A, her eyes fell on the notebook. She noticed the strange, complex shapes on the page. They didn't look like casual doodles or simple drawings. They looked like something technical, something she didn't quite understand. She paused for a moment, leaning slightly to get a better look. Elias didn't notice at first. He was too focused on a particular curve he was perfecting near the rear section of his design. Marina tilted her head. The lines reminded her of starship diagrams she had seen in training manuals, though these seemed more advanced. She wondered why a passenger would be working on something like that during a simple flight. Elias finally looked up. His eyes were calm but slightly guarded, as if he had been interrupted during a deep thought. Marina gave a polite smile and asked if he would like something to drink. Elias shook his head gently and said, "No, thank you." But her curiosity had already been sparked. She took a step closer and asked, in a friendly tone, if he was an engineer or an artist. Elias hesitated, glancing at his notebook before answering. He said he was just passing the time with some designs. His voice was polite, but carried a quiet weight, as if he was used to avoiding too many details about his work. Marina nodded, but her mind kept wondering about the complexity of those designs. She moved on to the next row, though she glanced back, once or twice. Elias returned to his sketches, but he was aware that someone had taken notice. It did not bother him much. He had dealt with curiosity before. Still, he preferred to work without eyes over his shoulder. As the stellar wind continued through the vast stretch between stars, Elias's mind drifted deeper into the design. He imagined the hum of the engines he was creating in his mind. He could almost see the way the new propulsion system would move a ship through space, reducing drag from cosmic particles and increasing energy efficiency. His pen moved faster now, drawing lines with confidence. He made notes in small, neat handwriting beside certain parts, marking them for later review. Outside the large cabin windows, space stretched endlessly. Stars appeared as tiny white sparks, unmoving from this distance. Occasionally, the faint glow of a passing satellite or transport ship would flash by. Elias barely noticed. His thoughts were anchored firmly to the work in front of him. Nearby, passengers relaxed in their seats. Some were travelers heading to new homes on Asterion 4. Others were merchants seeking trade opportunities. A few were scientists returning from research missions. Everyone had their own story, their own reason for being here. Elias's reason was different. He was not traveling for pleasure or trade. He was on this flight to clear his mind, to think freely away from the noise of corporate offices and endless meetings. Inspiration often came to him when he was in motion, and space travel had always been his favorite setting for new ideas. Minutes turned into hours. The cabin lights shifted into a softer glow, signaling the approach of mid-journey rest time. Gentle announcement from the captain's voice filled the air, assuring passengers that the stellar wind was on course and all systems were operating normally. Elias closed his notebook for a moment, letting his mind rest. He sipped from a small bottle of water and glanced out the window. In that quiet moment, he thought about how small human ships still were compared to the vastness of space and how much potential remained untapped. But Elias knew that change was coming. His designs could change the way humanity explored the stars. The sketches in his notebook might look simple to most, but they held the seeds of a future fleet, faster, safer, and capable of reaching worlds yet unseen. All he had to do was finish them, and the rest would follow. Far away in the cockpit, the pilots guided the stellar wind smoothly through its route. In the cabin, the hum of the engines continued, steady and reliable. And in seat 14A, Elias Carter kept drawing, the unnoticed passenger carrying an idea that might one day carry humanity farther than anyone could imagine. The stellar wind moved quietly through the deep black of space. The gentle vibration of its engines was the only reminder that the ship was crossing millions of kilometers between worlds. Inside the cabin, the soft cabin lights glowed warmly as passengers settled into the rhythm of the journey. Some spoke in low voices, some watched films, and others slept. Elias Carter was still in seat 14A, his pen moving over the thick paper of his notebook. The curved lines of his design had begun to take form. The main body of the ship was drawn in careful detail. The placement of engines was sketched with clear precision. Every mark had a purpose. His mind worked quickly, imagining how each part would fit into the greater design. Marina Holt, the young flight attendant, was working her way down the aisle again. She had been checking on passengers, refilling drinks, and making sure everyone was comfortable. Her steps were steady, but her thoughts kept returning to the man in seat 14A. She remembered the strange shapes in his notebook and the way he had spoken so briefly about them. Something about it stayed in her mind. When she reached his row again, she slowed. Elias was leaning slightly forward, his pen making quick movements across the page. The sketches now looked even more complicated than before. Small notes in fine handwriting filled the margins. Some lines curved in unusual patterns, looping into symbols that she had never seen. She had seen diagrams of engines during her safety training, but these were far more advanced. She wondered if she should ask him more about it. Curiosity was natural for her. She liked to understand people's stories. Still, she did not want to disturb him unnecessarily. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer with a friendly smile. "Working on something important?" she asked in a polite tone. Elias looked up from his work. His eyes were steady, though there was a hint of caution in his expression. "Just some designs," he replied, his voice calm. Marina tilted her head slightly. "It looks very technical. Are you an engineer?" Elias paused before answering. "Something like that." He returned his gaze to his notebook, his pen tapping lightly against the paper, before continuing a line. Marina was not satisfied. Her training taught her to be aware of unusual activity during flights, passengers working with strange symbols, and technical drawings were rare, especially on a civilian journey. She was not suspicious in an unfriendly way, but she wanted to understand what exactly she was looking at. As she stood there, a man seated across the aisle leaned forward to glance at Elias's notebook. "That looks complicated," he said, with mild curiosity. Elias gave a small nod but did not explain further. He had learned long ago that sharing too much about his work during travel often led to long conversations he did not want to have. His designs were valuable, and he preferred to keep them private until the time was right. Marina stepped back to continue her duties, but now she was even more curious. She thought about the different possibilities. Was he designing a ship for a company? Was it something for personal study? Or maybe something completely unrelated to engineering? Later, as she stood near the service station preparing drinks, she caught sight of Elias again from a distance. He was still writing and sketching, his attention unbroken. The way his hand moved made it clear he was deeply focused. Marina's fellow attendant, a man named Rian, noticed her watching. "What are you looking at?" he asked lightly. She explained quietly that one passenger seemed to be working on complex technical designs. Ryan shrugged. "People work on all sorts of things during flights. Maybe he's just an architect or a student." Marina nodded but still felt there was more to the story. She had a habit of noticing details others overlooked, and something about Elias's quiet precision made her think his work was more than just casual drawings. As the hours passed, small glances toward seat 14A became part of her routine. Each time she saw the page, it had more details. The outlines of the ship were now connected with straight lines that seemed to form navigation routes or energy channels. The rear section of the ship in his design had been adjusted twice, and she saw notes written in shorthand she did not recognize. At one point, she approached to offer him water. As she placed the bottle on his tray table, her eyes briefly scanned the open page. She noticed symbols beside the engines that almost looked like coded measurements. She had never seen anything like it outside of a training manual, and even then the designs had been much simpler. "Interesting work you've got there," she said with a friendly tone. Elias gave her a polite smile. "Just keeping my mind busy." It was clear he was not interested in sharing more. Marina decided not to press him, but in her mind, the mystery had grown larger. She did not realize that nearby passengers had also started to notice. Small glances and whispers passed between a few of them. Some thought he was a hobbyist artist. Others guessed he might be a scientist working on a project. The guesses were harmless, but the attention was growing quietly. Elias noticed the occasional glance from across the aisle. He had been in similar situations before. It was not unusual for strangers to be curious about technical drawings. Still, he felt the familiar sense that his work was attracting more attention than he liked. He shifted slightly in his seat, turning his notebook at a subtle angle to give himself more privacy. The stellar wind continued its steady journey, but in the cabin, a small current of curiosity was starting to build. Marina's interest had sparked the interest of others. No one asked direct questions yet, but more eyes drifted toward 14A from time to time. Marina, returning to the aisle once more, felt the quiet tension as she walked past. She did not think there was anything wrong happening, but the combination of secrecy and complex technical work during a passenger flight was unusual. Part of her wanted to ask the captain if he knew anything about Elias, but she decided against it for now. Elias remained calm, though he sensed the shift in the atmosphere. He had learned to work under observation without losing focus. For him, the ship's hum and the distant glow of the stars outside were all that mattered. His mind stayed locked on the design, imagining the day when this concept would become a real vessel cutting through the dark between worlds. The misunderstanding had not yet taken form, but the first seeds had been planted. Marina's curiosity and the quiet whispers of nearby passengers had set the stage for something larger. For now, Elias Carter remained the quiet, unnoticed man in seat 14A, but the attention around him was slowly beginning to grow. The stellar wind glided forward, its polished silver body cutting through the quiet of space. The long journey between Earth and Astarion 4 was still hours from completion, but the passengers were growing more familiar with one another. Conversations rose and fell like gentle waves in the cabin. Laughter from a small group in the rear mixed with the soft hum of the engines. The steady routine of the flight made time pass smoothly. In seat 14A, Elias Carter was still focused on his notebook. The pages now contained multiple layers of sketches. The design of the ship had taken shape from nose to tail. Every curve was refined, every section marked with clear annotations. His handwriting was small and neat, but the meaning behind the notes would be clear only to someone with advanced engineering knowledge. Across the aisle, a young man named Joran leaned slightly toward his seatmate. "He's been writing for hours," Joran whispered, nodding toward Elias. "Those aren't just drawings. Look at the detail." His seatmate, a middle-aged woman named Lisa, followed his gaze. She tilted her head slightly. "Maybe he's an artist," she said. "Or maybe a scientist." Joran shrugged. "Looks more like ship schematics to me. My cousin works in maintenance on the orbital docks, and I've seen plans like that before." The small exchange was quiet, but it added to the curiosity in the nearby rows. A few passengers glanced in Elias's direction more often now. They were careful not to stare openly, but the shift was noticeable. Marina Holt, the flight attendant, walked down the aisle carrying a tray of refreshments. She noticed several passengers watching Elias as she passed. It confirmed her feeling that others had noticed his unusual work. She tried to focus on her duties, but each time she approached seat 14A, she felt drawn to the mystery. When she stopped to serve drinks to the passengers near Elias, one of them asked her in a low voice, "Do you know what he's working on?" Marina gave a polite smile and shook her head. "I'm not sure. He said they were just designs." The passenger nodded, but kept his eyes on Elias's notebook, as if hoping to catch a glimpse of the details. Elias was aware of the glances now. He had tried to ignore them, but years of experience had made him sensitive to changes in his surroundings. He kept working, but his hand moved slightly closer to the edge of the tray table, creating a small shield for his sketches. He preferred to stay unnoticed, yet it seemed this flight would not allow that. A few rows behind, a conversation began between two merchants traveling to Astarion 4. One had noticed the designs earlier and was now explaining his guess to the other. "I think he's working on a new type of freighter," the first merchant said. "Look at the rear thruster layout. It's too heavy for a passenger ship." The second merchant narrowed his eyes. "Or maybe it's for exploration. Those long-range energy lines look like something used for deep space travel." Their discussion, though quiet, spread to others nearby. Soon, small pockets of passengers were sharing their own guesses about the quiet man in 14A. The theories ranged from practical to imaginative. Some believed he was preparing for a presentation at a technology summit. Others joked that he might be designing a personal spaceship. The attention was still soft, without hostility, but it created a subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Elias remained calm, though he adjusted his posture so his notebook rested, at a slight angle. He wanted to finish the propulsion section before the next service round. Marina passed by again and noticed how a few passengers leaned just slightly to see his work as they walked past. She realized the situation could become distracting for him, so she decided to check in. Stopping beside his seat, she lowered her voice. "I hope the attention isn't bothering you," she said kindly. Elias looked up, his expression even. "It's fine," he said. "I'm used to people being curious." Marina gave a small nod and moved on, though she still wondered about the value of what he was creating. She had seen plenty of passengers pass the time with books or games, but never with something that looked so professional. Time passed. The cabin lights dimmed slightly to signal the mid-journey quiet period. Most passengers settled back into their seats. Yet a few still stole glances at 14A. Even those who had not seen the notebook were curious because of the whispers they had heard. The change in atmosphere was not lost on the crew either. Ryan, the other flight attendant, noticed it when he went down the aisle to check on passengers. "Seems like your friend in 14A is the center of attention," he said to Marina later in the service area. Marina smiled faintly. "He's not really my friend, but yes, people are interested. I think it's just harmless curiosity." Elias, meanwhile, continued to refine the central propulsion unit on his drawing. He calculated how energy would flow from the main reactors into the twin thrusters, balancing efficiency with safety. In his mind, the ship was already flying, cutting across the distance between stars faster than anything currently built. But he was also aware of the soft sound of someone shifting in their seat nearby, leaning forward slightly. Without looking up, he turned the page in his notebook, starting a fresh sketch for the navigation control layout. This one was less complete, which meant it would be harder for anyone to guess what it was at a glance. Across the aisle, Joran whispered again to Lisa, "He just started a new drawing? This one looks different." Lisa chuckled softly. "You're more interested than you admit," Joran smiled. "It's not every day you see someone designing a spaceship during a passenger flight." The quiet interest of the passengers was now something like a shared secret. No one spoke loudly about it, but nearly everyone in that section of the cabin knew that something unusual was happening in seat 14A. Outside the windows, the stars burned silently, unchanged by the small drama inside the ship. The stellar wind moved on its steady course, its navigation systems guiding it across the void. The passengers relaxed into their seats, but the whispers never completely stopped. For Elias Carter, the journey was meant to be a peaceful time to work. Instead, it had become a setting where his privacy was slowly being chipped away. He was still calm, still polite, but the growing attention was impossible to ignore. The misunderstanding had not yet reached its peak, but it was no longer just between him and Marina. Now, the whole cabin section was involved, each passenger carrying their own theory about who he was and what he was doing. And somewhere in that quiet web of curiosity, the first real step toward a bigger problem was already forming. The stellar wind moved steadily through the dark sea of space. The stars outside looked like scattered jewels against a black curtain. Inside, the cabin was calm. Passengers were relaxed, some sleeping, others reading or watching screens. The earlier whispers about the man in seat 14A had quieted, but the curiosity still remained just beneath the surface. Elias Carter sat in the same steady position, his pen gliding over the page. He was now working on a cross-section of the engine, housing. Every measurement was written with precision. His eyes moved between the shapes and the numbers, running silent calculations in his head. The steady hum of the ship's engines was a background rhythm that kept him focused. Then, without warning, the hum changed. It was not a loud sound, but it was different enough for someone like Elias to notice immediately. The deep, smooth vibration shifted into a slightly uneven tone, as if something inside the ship's systems was struggling to keep balance. To the untrained ear, it might have gone unnoticed, but to an engineer, it was a sign that something had changed. A moment later, The cabin lights flickered once. The screens on the backs of the seats froze for a second before resuming. A quiet chime rang through the cabin, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing a minor navigation system issue. There is no cause for concern, and our engineering crew is already addressing the matter. We ask that you remain seated until further notice." The passengers looked up from their activities, some glancing toward the windows, others at the crew. Marina Holt moved calmly down the aisle, reassuring passengers with a polite smile. Her training had prepared her for moments like this, and she knew her job was to keep everyone calm. Elias placed his pen on the notebook and listened closely. The sound of the ship told him more than the announcement. Whatever had happened was affecting the secondary thruster alignment. It was not a crisis yet, but if left unchecked, it could cause a course deviation that would require a longer journey or an emergency stop at a maintenance station. In the cockpit, the crew worked quickly. The main navigation AI had frozen for several seconds before restarting in backup mode. The ship could still move forward, but it needed manual adjustments to keep the flight path precise. The engineer on duty, a man named Carvin, was busy recalculating the course by hand. Marina stopped at Elias's row as she passed. "Everything is fine," she said kindly. "Just a minor issue. We'll be back to normal soon." Elias gave a small nod. "I understand," he said, though his tone carried more certainty than concern. She moved on, but her curiosity deepened. How could he sound so sure without hearing the details from the crew? She did not know that Elias had already pieced together the nature of the problem from the slight changes in the ship's sound. Minutes passed. The lights remained steady now, but the hum of the engines still carried the faint unevenness. Elias glanced around the cabin. Passengers were calm for now, but he could tell the crew was moving with more urgency than they showed. Finally, Elias closed his notebook and stood. He approached the service area where Marina and Rian were speaking quietly. "Excuse me," he said in a polite, steady voice. "Would it be possible for me to speak with your engineer or captain? I believe I may be able to help." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Help? Sir, the crew has the situation under control." Elias gave a small, patient, "Nah, I understand. But if the secondary thruster alignment is what I think it is, you may need an alternate calculation method to correct the drift." Marina's eyes widened slightly. "How do you know about that?" Elias met her gaze. "I hear it. The vibration pattern is off. It is subtle, but it is there." Ryan looked uncertain. It was unusual for a passenger to speak with such specific knowledge about the ship's systems. Marina thought for a moment, then made a quick decision. "I'll inform the captain," she said before heading to the cockpit. Inside the cockpit, she explained what Elias had said. The captain exchanged a quick glance with Carvin, the engineer. Carvin frowned. If he can hear that much from the cabin, he knows his engines. And he's right about the drift. We're working on the recalculations now, but it's slow without the main AI. The captain made a decision. "Bring him in." Marina returned to Elias and gestured for him to follow. He stepped into the cockpit with quiet confidence. The captain greeted him, and Elias gave a respectful nod before looking over the navigation display. The readings confirmed what he had suspected. "Your backup mode is working, but the alignment offset is growing," Elias said calmly. "If you adjust the vector here by 0.03 degrees and balance the thrust-output ratio, you can stabilize without losing speed." Carvin leaned in to check the figures. Elias pulled his notebook from under his arm and quickly sketched the adjustment process. His hand moved quickly but precisely, showing a method that required fewer calculations than the standard procedure. Within minutes, they had applied the changes. The hum of the engines shifted back to its smooth, steady tone. The navigation readouts showed the course correction taking effect. The captain smiled slightly. "That was fast work, Mr. Carter. May I ask your profession?" Elias replied simply. "Ship design." Carvin's eyebrows rose. "That explains a lot. I have seen work like yours in Orion Dynamics manuals." Elias gave a modest smile. "I worked there." Marina, standing near the doorway, realized the full meaning of what she was hearing. This quiet man in seat 14A was not just a passenger with a hobby. He was a professional who designed ships for one of the most respected companies in the industry. The captain thanked Elias for his assistance and offered him a seat in the cockpit for the remainder of the adjustment process. Elias declined politely, saying he preferred to return to his work. Back in the cabin, passengers had noticed Marina leading Elias toward the cockpit earlier. When he returned to his seat, a few curious glances followed him. Joran, across the aisle, leaned toward Lisa. "He went into the cockpit, told you he was important." Elias reopened his notebook and began sketching again, as if nothing unusual had happened. The ship moved on its corrected path, the hum of the engines now perfectly steady. The misunderstanding was still alive among the passengers, but it had begun to shift. Now, curiosity was joined by a quiet respect. The man in seat 14A had not only drawn strange designs, but had also played a part in keeping the stellar wind on course. What no one yet realized was that this was only the beginning of his role in the journey. The stellar wind sailed smoothly now, its engines humming in perfect balance. The earlier problem was behind them, and the cabin had returned to its calm rhythm. Passengers chatted quietly or leaned back in their seats. Yet a new kind of energy filled the air. People had noticed the man in seat 14A walking to the cockpit earlier, and their curiosity was stronger than before. Elias Carter sat in his seat once again, his notebook open on the tray table. He had returned to his sketches as if nothing unusual had happened. His pen moved steadily, refining details in the propulsion section. The same calm focus was in his eyes, but his presence now carried a quiet weight. Those who had seen him enter the cockpit seemed to watch him more closely, as though he were no longer just another passenger. Across the aisle, Joran leaned toward Lisa. "He definitely works for the ship," Joran whispered. "No passenger. Just walks into the cockpit during a flight." Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe he's an inspector or a designer. He knew exactly what to do. You saw how quickly the hum of the engines went back to normal. 2 rows back, a small group of passengers were having their own conversation about him. Some guessed he was a retired pilot. Others thought he might be part of a special project for the airline. Every guess only added to the mystery. Marina Holt, the young flight attendant, had been thinking about him ever since she saw the captain. Welcome him into the cockpit. She had learned enough from that short visit to know he was someone important, but she had not yet told the passengers. She believed it was his choice to share who he was. During her next round through the cabin, Marina stopped at his row. "Mr. Carter," she said in a polite tone, "the captain asked me to thank you again for your help earlier. He also mentioned that your adjustments saved us a great deal of time." Elias gave a small smile. "I was glad to help. It was a simple matter once I saw the readings." Marina hesitated, then asked in a quieter voice, "Would you mind if I told the passengers what you do? There's a lot of curiosity about you." Elias looked at her for a moment, then gave a short nod. "If you think it will help them feel at ease, you may tell them." When Marina reached the center of the cabin, she made an announcement, her voice carrying clearly but warmly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know many of you have noticed that one of our passengers assisted in the cockpit earlier. I would like to let you know that Mr. Elias Carter is a lead spacecraft designer for Orion Dynamics, the company that created the Stellar Wind and many other ships in our fleet. His knowledge helped us make a quick and safe adjustment to our navigation systems today." The cabin filled with soft murmurs of surprise. People turned in their seats to look at Elias, who gave a small nod in acknowledgement. The whispers were now full of recognition. Orion Dynamics was a name everyone in space travel knew. Their ships were known for speed, safety, and innovation. To realize that one of their designers was sitting quietly among them was unexpected. Joren grinned and whispered to Lysa, "I knew it! I knew those were real schematics." Lysa smiled. "Now it all makes sense." Several passengers smiled at Elias as Marina passed by again. One older man even raised his hand in a small gesture of thanks. Elias responded with a polite nod but kept his focus on his notebook. He was not seeking attention, though he understood. Why people were curious now? Marina, seeing the shift in the cabin, felt relieved. The earlier tension caused by the unknown had been replaced with respect. The misunderstanding that had started with her curiosity had turned into admiration from the passengers. As the hours passed, the cabin's mood remained light. People occasionally glanced toward 14A, but the looks were now friendly rather than cautious. A young student seated a few rows away worked up the courage to approach him during a break. "Mr. Carter," she said shyly, "I'm studying aerospace engineering. Your work with Orion Dynamics is inspiring." Elias closed his notebook for a moment and smiled. "Keep studying. The stars are wide open for people who can imagine something new and make it real." The student thanked him and returned to her seat, clearly encouraged. In the cockpit, the captain and Carvin spoke quietly about Elias. "It is rare to have someone like him on board," Carvin said. His method for the thruster correction was, "faster than anything in our manual. I will be adding it to my personal notes." The captain agreed. "He works for the company that designed this ship. Having him here today was a piece of good fortune." Back in the cabin, Elias continued to refine his sketches. Now that his identity was known, he no longer had to shield the pages so carefully. Passengers still looked at them with interest, but no one tried to intrude. They understood that they were looking at the mind of someone who built the ships that carried them through space. Marina stopped by one last time before the meal service. "You've become a bit of a hero on this flight," she said with a faint smile. Elias shook his head lightly. "I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. The real credit goes to the crew for acting quickly." Even so, his presence had given the passengers something to talk about for the remainder of the trip. The mystery that had begun with a quiet man sketching in a notebook had now turned into a story they would share when they landed. For Elias, it was simply another journey, but he knew that moments like this mattered. Every time people saw the faces behind the ships they traveled in, they understood a little more about the care and thought that went into every design. The stars outside burned steadily as the stellar wind moved forward, carrying its passengers toward Asterion 4. And in seat 14A, Elias Carter kept designing, already thinking of the next ship that would take humanity farther than ever before. The stellar wind moved steadily through the endless black of space, its silver hull reflecting faint starlight like scattered diamonds. Inside the cabin, passengers had settled after the earlier excitement. Quiet conversations replaced whispers of curiosity. The announcement of Elias Carter's identity had changed the mood. He was no longer just a passenger. To many, he was a person who had helped keep the flight safe and smooth. Elias sat in seat 14A, his notebook open again. The pages now contained sketches that were more than just ideas. They were refined concepts for propulsion and navigation systems. Even after the minor problem earlier, he remained focused. The hum of the stellar wind's engines served as a rhythm for his thoughts, steady and reassuring. Farther forward, the captain monitored the ship's systems. Carvin, the engineer, double-checked the readings after the earlier adjustment. Everything was back in balance, yet a small anomaly remained in the secondary thrusters. It was not dangerous, but over long journeys, even minor deviations could affect fuel efficiency and travel time. Marina Holt moved along the aisle, checking on passengers. She glanced at Elias, who was calmly drawing, and she noticed his focus had not wavered. Even with his recent recognition, he had returned to work as if the rest of the cabin did not exist. She admired that quiet dedication. Suddenly, a gentle alarm sounded from the cockpit. It was a soft tone, designed not to alarm passengers, but it caught the attention of the crew. Carvin spoke quickly into his headset. "We are seeing minor fluctuations in the energy output of the secondary thrusters. It is small, but it could accumulate over time." The captain nodded. "Continue monitoring. Let's see if it stabilizes. If not, we may need manual recalculation again." Elias noticed the small shift in the vibration and immediately calculated in his mind how the thrust imbalance would affect the route. He saw the potential for a slight drift in the next few hours. The problem was minor, but required precise intervention. He stood and walked calmly to the service area where Marina was organizing supplies. "The secondary thrusters are showing a slight imbalance," he said. "It will not cause danger immediately, but over distance it may affect efficiency. I can help the engineer correct it." Marina looked at him surprised. "You mean again? Are you sure?" Elias nodded. "Yes, I can help." She hesitated for a moment, then made the decision. "Follow me to the cockpit. Carvin is already monitoring the readings." Inside the cockpit, the displays showed the minor fluctuations Elias had predicted. Carvin was already running calculations, but his process was slower without Elias's experience. Elias stepped closer and pointed at the display. "Adjust the thrust output ratio by 0.25% and shift the alignment vector slightly to compensate for the drift," he said calmly. "Then run a short recalculation cycle on the backup computer. That will stabilize the readings fully." Carvin raised his eyebrows. "That is faster than my normal procedure." Elias smiled lightly. "Sometimes simpler calculations work if you understand the system." The captain watched silently, impressed by the quiet authority Elias displayed. Within minutes, the adjustments were applied. The hum of the engines returned to perfect rhythm. The displays showed stable energy flow and correct alignment across all thrusters. Passengers, though unaware of the technical details, noticed that the earlier gentle vibration had disappeared. The stellar wind moved as if gliding on invisible rails. Marina returned to the cabin briefly and noticed the passengers exchanging looks. Quiet whispers spread about the man in 14A helping once again. Respect and admiration filled the cabin. Children who had been curious about the sketches now looked at Elias with a sense of awe. Elias returned to his seat, picking up his pen. The notebook was no longer just a tool for personal design. In the last few hours, his sketches had begun to resemble a new kind of ship, one that could travel farther, faster, and safer than anything currently in service. He thought about the ideas quietly, his mind already imagining prototypes. A young boy seated across from him leaned slightly forward. "Are you really a spaceship designer?" he asked, eyes wide. Elias gave a small nod. "Yes, I design ships that carry people across space safely." The boy smiled. "I want to make spaceships too someday." "Keep drawing and learning," Elias said kindly. "The future belongs to people who work on their ideas." The boy's father looked on, impressed. "You have a real gift, sir," he said softly. Elias simply nodded. He did not need praise. The satisfaction came from knowing his work could make a real difference. Back in the cockpit, the captain spoke quietly with Carvin. "Having him here made this adjustment simple. We may have a chance to integrate some of his new concepts into our future ships." Carvin agreed. "He is remarkable. His understanding of propulsion and efficiency is beyond anything we have seen in training manuals." Marina, returning to the aisle, noticed the quiet energy among passengers. Some were sketching their own designs in notebooks, inspired by Elias. Others whispered about how someone sitting quietly among them had saved the ship from inefficiency. Elias returned to his notebook and began drawing the next stage of his new ship design. It was a hybrid of efficiency and speed, combining what he had learned from Orion dynamics with ideas he had imagined for years. Each line represented careful thought. Every curve had purpose. He was already thinking about the day this design could become reality. As the stellar wind moved through space, passengers remained calm and curious. The earlier misunderstanding about his sketches had transformed into admiration and respect. People realized that even in the quietest passenger, there could be great skill and knowledge. By the time the meal service began, Elias had completed a major section of his new concept. He leaned back, satisfied with the progress. The ship hummed steadily, passengers were relaxed, and the crew trusted the path they followed. Elias's role in the flight had become more than just a passenger. He had helped ensure safety and inspired those around him with his quiet expertise. The stars outside the windows continued to shine, undisturbed by the small events inside the cabin. Inside, a quiet excitement lingered. The passengers had seen firsthand the difference one skilled person could make. They had observed problem-solving, calm thinking, and the ability to transform a minor technical challenge into a smooth journey. Elias Carter returned to his sketches once more. The flight was still long, but the purpose had shifted. His designs now carried the weight of possibility. Every line was a step toward a new fleet, a new era of travel. The passengers watched quietly, inspired by the man who turned simple sketches into a vision of the future. And in the seat beside the aisle, Elias continued to draw, carrying both the calm of the present and the promise of tomorrow. The stellar wind glided smoothly through the stars, its silver hull shining faintly under the glow of distant suns. Inside the cabin, a quiet excitement lingered. The passengers were calm, but their thoughts often drifted to the quiet man in Seat 14A. Elias Carter had moved from being a mystery to a source of respect and inspiration. His actions earlier in the flight had reminded everyone how one person's knowledge and skill could make a difference. Elias sat quietly in his seat, his notebook open again. The pages were filled with detailed sketches, the beginnings of a new kind of starship. He had combined lessons learned from Orion dynamics with his own ideas, imagining a fleet of ships capable of faster travel and improved safety for everyone. Every line, every curve, and every measurement reflected hours of careful thought. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the stellar wind entered a section of space with higher star density. Passengers relaxed, their attention returning to books, screens, or quiet conversations. Yet some still glanced at Elias's notebook, curious about the designs that had become part of the flight's story. Marina Holt moved down the aisle, her eyes briefly meeting Elias's. She had come to admire his calm and focus, she remembered. The initial curiosity she had felt, the hesitation to approach, and the relief when he had helped the crew with the navigation problem. Now, she understood that he was more than a skilled passenger. He was someone whose mind worked with precision and creativity, someone whose ideas could inspire the next generation. "Mr. Carter," she said softly as she passed, "some of the passengers have been asking if they can see your sketches. They are inspired by your work." Elias looked up and gave a small, polite smile. "I am happy for them to take a look," he said. "They may learn something useful or imagine something new themselves." Marina nodded and returned to her duties. Soon, a few passengers gathered quietly near his row, looking at the notebook with careful respect. Elias explained some of the general concepts, avoiding confidential details. He spoke simply, showing how shapes, curves, and ratios could affect speed and efficiency. Children and adults alike leaned forward, their eyes wide with fascination. One young student sitting a few rows back whispered, "I want to design spaceships like this someday." Elias nodded. "Start with small ideas, practice, learn from every sketch and every calculation. One day, you will design ships that carry people across the stars safely." The stellar wind continued its journey. Hours passed, and the passengers grew more familiar with the quiet confidence Elias displayed. People spoke softly among themselves about the lessons they had learned just from observing him work. Some took notes, others sketched their own designs in small notebooks. The cabin had transformed from a place of simple travel into a quiet workshop of inspiration. Meanwhile, the cockpit remained calm. Carvin checked the systems one more time, ensuring that the minor thruster fluctuation had been fully corrected. The captain glanced toward the cabin occasionally, satisfied with the smooth journey and the calm of the passengers. He knew that Elias's help had made the flight safer and more efficient, and he could not ignore the positive effect on everyone on board. After some time, the announcement for the final descent to Asterion 4 began. The passengers prepared for landing, some chatting about the remarkable journey and the lessons they had witnessed. Marina walked down the aisle, assisting where needed, and noticed that many passengers now looked at Elias with admiration rather than curiosity. The earlier whispers of suspicion had transformed into appreciation for his skill and quiet dedication. Elias continued drawing until the final moments before the landing sequence began. Then, he carefully closed his notebook and placed it safely in his bag. He looked out the window at the approaching world, reflecting on the journey and the ideas that had been born during it. As the stellar wind touched down on the landing platform of Asterion 4, the passengers applauded softly. It was both for the smooth landing and the quiet confidence of the crew. Elias rose from his seat, his calm demeanor unchanged by the attention. A few passengers approached him, thanking him personally for his help. One older man spoke first. "Mr. Carter, your knowledge and skill made a real difference today. We are grateful." Elias gave a modest nod. "It was my pleasure. The crew handled everything with professionalism. I only offered some guidance." A young woman, a student of space engineering, stepped forward. "I hope to design ships like you someday," she said. "Keep learning and practicing," Elias said kindly. "The stars need people who dream and create." Marina watched from the aisle, smiling quietly. She had learned a lesson about judgment and curiosity. The quiet sketches that had seemed strange at first had turned into knowledge, help, and inspiration. She realized that sometimes patience and understanding could uncover great talent in unexpected places. Later, as passengers disembarked, Elias stayed back briefly, collecting his things. The crew thanked him again, and the captain nodded with respect. He knew that Elias had not only helped save time and maintain the flight path, but had also shown the passengers a glimpse of what skill and creativity could achieve. In the quiet of the cargo area, Elias opened his notebook one last time. He reviewed the sketches for the new fleet. Ideas had developed during the flight, new configurations for engines, hull designs, and navigation systems. These concepts were ready to take the next step toward reality. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the inspiration extended beyond his own work. Passengers had seen the process of creation, and some had caught a spark that might grow into something greater. The Stellar Wind's mission on Asterion 4 had only just begun, but Elias Carter's role had left a lasting mark. He had turned a minor misunderstanding into respect and had transformed curiosity into learning. The designs in his notebook were not only for the next generation of ships, but also a reminder that talent and focus could quietly change the world, even during a single flight. As the stars faded behind the horizon of the planet, Elias looked forward. The journey of imagination and creation never stopped. The new fleet he had sketched in the quiet moments of travel would one day soar across the galaxy, carrying the dreams and hopes of many. And for those who had watched him work, they would remember that one quiet passenger had made a difference, not only in the safety of the flight, but also in inspiring them to reach for the stars themselves. The stellar wind stood ready on the landing platform, a symbol of progress and possibility. Elias Carter walked forward with calm determination, carrying both the lessons of the journey and the promise of the future. The galaxy was vast, and his designs were only the beginning. And with that, a new chapter in the story of exploration, skill, and inspiration had begun.